In the history of professional wrestling, there's been some big-time stars, brother, but none bigger than Stone Cold Steve Austin. During his reign in the Attitude Era, there was nothing he did wrong. All the bookings were great, and the audience never got enough. Well, except for one little thing. That time he tried to turn heel, which many consider the event that ended the Attitude Era. But what if we changed that? What would it have looked like? We find out today. Welcome to Rebooking the Territory podcast. This is the podcast where we go back and change storylines, wrestling angles, you name it, to the things that they should have been the first time. My guest this week, he is the host of the Tough Talk podcast, AJ Kirsch. It's good to have you back on the podcast once again here. How are you doing?
I'm well, man. World's opening back up. Hopefully it doesn't shut down again. If you're listening to this, for the love of God, get vaccinated. Please get vaccinated. COVID is real. Science is real. Your excuses are not. Go out and get vaccinated.
And now we just lost half our audience.
Well, yeah. sorry, everybody. Not sorry. Go get vaccinated.
Yes.
So we can enjoy live pro wrestling and live comedy and all the things that we enjoy doing with other people, even if we don't know them. It's part of the magic of live entertainment.
It's kind of important. Yeah. I'm actually surprised that there are people aren't vaccinated yet. So, hey.
Yeah. Staggers the imagination. So if you are one of them, I get it. A lot of questions. Get vaccinated. Don't die. Don't cause others to die. We want you around.
There we go. Well, that's a great way to start off this week's podcast. So we've got an interesting topic today, and I think that just about any wrestling fan that grew up in the Attitude Era wrestling is going to be familiar with our point of topic today.
Yes.
Which is not just Stone Cold Steve Austin, because every wrestling fan and everybody who's ever heard of pro wrestling knows pretty much three names: Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and The Rock. Those are just like, they've transcended into the zeitgeist of at least all Americans, but really worldwide, there's a lot of fans of those folks. And so, yes, we're going to talk about Stone Cold Steve Austin, but there's not a lot that you could rebook for this guy. Right? Like if you were just going to just talk in general, he had a pretty darn good career as Stone Cold. Yep. We have a previous episode of Stunning Steve Austin that people can go back and listen to, which was very interesting to try to go back and see what his career in WCW could have been like.
And if you're not familiar with Stunning Steve Austin, just do yourself a favor and Google Stunning Steve Austin, a far cry, specifically aesthetically, from Stone Cold Steve Austin. It's kind of amazing that they're the same person.
It's shocking. And what we're going to be covering today is his heel turn in 2001, which, kind of left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. It's really the only thing as Stone Cold that you could rebook, other than you say like, oh, him walking out on the Brock Lesnar thing.
Yeah, that popped up in my mind too. I'm like, that's his one do-over. If he could have that back, I think that's his number one. But from a fan standpoint, yeah, this was not an easy pill to swallow, and I dare say a lot of fans refused to swallow it entirely.
I think it's almost forgotten now because he was so popular, and I don't know your exact history with Stone Cold. I know I saw him in person wrestle on a Monday Night Raw, 97. 98,
okay.
Somewhere in that range, back in Indiana when I still lived there. Well, obviously I was a kid, but I got to see him live on a Monday Night Raw there. And that was, I bought a Stone Cold Steve Austin wallet.
Nice.
With one of those long chains. Cause it was one of those, it's the 90s. So of course you had to have a super long chain on your wallet for some reason.
Right.
In case anybody wanted to steal my lunch money, I guess. And so how about you? Where was kind of, not necessarily even just your entry point in Stone Cold, because it's hard. Somebody that is that large a presence in pro wrestling, it's hard to necessarily pinpoint the very first time, but maybe just your most unique moment with Stone Cold.
I'm pausing and like grinning because I am lucky to have had a number of moments with Steve Austin, um, personal moments, like you mentioned the Tough Talk podcast at the top of the show. So that was it's kind of the tell-all companion piece to a 2011 reality show called WWE Tough Enough, and the host and head trainer was Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Which is pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
Like that's really cool.
I got to train under Stone Cold Steve Austin. Even they didn't air this, but I was one of the few that he got in the ring and beat the crap out of. So I was on the other end of a beating from Stone Cold Steve Austin. I was later a guest on his podcast 3 times, actually. But one time it was actually in his home in Marina Del Rey in California when he had that house. So when it comes to like my moments with Steve, they're those where I'm just like, I can't believe this is happening right now.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
like that,
yeah.
There's certain things like my wife was working on a TV show in LA a couple years ago, and we lived in Marina Del Rey.
Okay.
That was where the TV show had put her up. And so I would just go for walks. And one day I walked by, I guess, his home because I listened to the podcast, and so I am not giving any information that he himself had not given out. Right. There was his truck. Like he had a Bronco, I believe, or something along those lines. And then he also had talked about how he had like a Prius, like he had bought a Prius or something like that off of his mother-in-law. And I'm walking down Marina Del Rey and I see these, and I think there might have even been like a Stone Cold skull in the window. And I was like, is this? Yeah, this is Stone Cold Steve Austin's house, just going for a walk in my neighborhood at the time.
Yeah, that's so cool. So like, was there even a part of you that was like, should I just knock on the door?
Not a single part.
Not one. Okay.
Not one, because I know how that will be received.
Yeah.
When you're in entertainment, there's certain things that you don't want to be the guy.
Yeah, protocol. Yeah.
Right. You want to be invited into those conversations. When you're the guy that knocks on the door or whatever, it's fine if you are a celebrity, like big time A-list celebrity yourself. If Brad Pitt walked up and knocked on Stone Cold Steve Austin's door, it would be jarring for a second, but then he'd be like, that's Brad Pitt.
Right.
Come on in, let's talk. But if it's just a stranger, it creeps people out. And
that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Like this is a comedy example. Just a couple weeks ago, I was at Gotham Comedy Club, and Jerry Seinfeld came in. And Jerry he's not the guy that is going to come hang out with the other comics.
Okay.
He's kind of there to do his thing. He, almost like pull the Porsche up to the door, walk
in and out,
go to the stage, and walk right back to the Porsche, right? And so I don't go up to talk to him. Like I don't introduce myself. I don't go, hey, I'm a comedian and I perform here, whatever. It's like, I just
let him do his thing. Yeah.
Let him do his thing, because if for one, I don't want a bad taste in my mouth of their response to me. Yeah. Right. You don't want to be, you got to be invited into Stone Cold's home. And so he was welcoming.
Right. Right.
And you have like now a great memory of how cool this dude is. I don't want to be the guy that is literally just picked up and thrown out the door.
Right.
And cursed at and given a stunner in the middle of the street.
Right. Or him going like, who are you? What are you doing here? And you're just like, I'm just a big fan.
Yeah. I'm trying to list my credits.
Yeah, right.
Like, you don't want to try to have to sell yourself to the person that you're trying to talk to.
Right. You're like, I was a neighbor once for a little while.
Yeah.
As far as wrestling goes, though, like the big Steve Austin moment, I think for me, like obviously he was on that kind of rocket ship after King of the Ring 96 when he coined the phrase Austin 316. Mm-hmm. But it was really this thing with Brian Pillman, that I think established Steve as this almost like merciless killer kind of, which is like where the Stone Cold name came from. I think it was like looking up serial killer names or something. And, and that's how, I mean, his wife at the time, the story is pretty common where she's like, go ahead and drink up your tea before it gets stone cold. but he was watching like documentaries on serial killers. But yeah, just because, and I didn't know at the time that Steve Austin and Brian Pillman used to be tag team partners in
The
WCW
Hollywood Blondes.
as the
right?
Hollywood Blondes. That's right. And so I just thought that Brian Pillman was a member of the Hart Foundation who was injured. And here was Steve Austin, who was cooking up this feud with Bret Hart. And then Pillman in this like leg brace or a boot or something. And then Steve just beats the crap out of him, takes his cane and like whacks him over the bad leg with the cane. Like he kicks his ass. And he did it in a way that looked different from any other wrestler I had ever seen beat somebody up before, with just such aggression and malice that he made me believe in what I was watching, even though I still kind of in the back of my head knew that wrestling was a show. And I was like 12, maybe 13 at the time. So just starting to come out of that like wide-eyed mysticism of my youth, but pro wrestling was still kind of magic for me at the time. And Steve just made me believe in everything he was doing.
Yeah, that's a key word, believability.
Yep.
And in professional wrestling, and you know this more than most, is that there's going to be a suspension of disbelief.
Right.
In order to watch professional wrestling, that we all know what's going on. Vince McMahon made that very clear in the early 80s, what is going on here.
Right. But it's no different real quick from going into a movie theater and watching Mark Hamill move things with his mind.
Yes.
Or watch, I don't know, what's a big movie? Jungle Cruise, Dwayne Johnson. I don't know what the movie's about, but he's not Dwayne Johnson in the movie. He's whoever his character is. Or when you're watching Game of Thrones, you know what I mean? Like, you fill in the blank, any medium of storytelling. When you're watching Netflix or you're watching a movie, you're going into it being like, we're all going to play pretend together.
Yes.
That's what wrestling is.
That is 100%. It's entertainment. And that's true in comedy.
Yep.
You have to be able to go along with the premise that these are jokes and we're here to be funny. They're clear. Every time a comedian is being canceled, I shouldn't say every day, most times it's because there is somebody that does not go along with the fact that these things are jokes.
Right.
I'm talking about on stage things, by the way. I'm not talking about off stage things that comedians are being canceled on.
Sure.
We're talking about just on stage. So that canyon between believability and disbelief has to be close. You can't have Jerry Seinfeld, to use his name again, has described with jokes, like the cavern has to be wide enough that it's exhilarating, but not so wide that you can't make it.
So it's Evel Knievel.
Yes. And you don't want to be him just parachuting down the gorge right? Over the Grand Canyon.
You don't want him to almost make it and explode in a fiery wreck.
Right. And so because the audience members should be the ones that are Evel Knievel. They're the ones taking the leap with us. And so if they're burning and crashing, then you get some problems there. And so with Stone Cold, that was just the right balance where it's like the almost the cliche of like, I know wrestling's fake, but that guy's real, right? That's kind of the old cliche with it. And that's for sure. He felt real.
He did. Yep. And that's what made him so unique at the time, because WWF, as it was known then, was still geared mostly towards kids, like younger kids. And here comes this character who's saying 4-letter words and flipping the bird, and was really one of the catalysts of the Attitude Era, which launched the WWF into an entirely different stratosphere, a stratosphere that many would argue hit its peak with this exact moment. I shouldn't say hit its peak. This event that this heel turn took place, that was the peak of the Attitude Era, and it was actually this moment that was the beginning of the end.
Yeah, and I've actually even heard people say that his heel turn, him shaking Vince McMahon's hand, ended the Attitude Era. Like that exact moment, which is, and I even the ramifications for Steve Austin's career, he didn't last much longer.
No,
like
2 years. Yeah. 2 years later was his last match, which was also against The Rock.
Yes.
Their third encounter at WrestleMania. And to just touch on that real quick, because I think once we dive into the subject matter here, we've got a lot to dig through. It was really cool of Steve to and I don't think it was like Steve was going to give Rock that victory, but Steve had beaten The Rock twice at WrestleMania, and it was cool that Steve's last match, and nobody knew it was the last match except for Vince, Jim Ross, and I think The Rock. It was really cool just to see The Rock get that one victory, as Steve called it a career much earlier than he would have liked, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a difficult position that I am not in, of being so big and having so much pressure. And obviously, especially in this day, there is no Brock Lesnar type schedule where you show up when you want to show up, and it's all right. I'll do the
seven figures. Yeah.
It's you're there every night, and you're selling the merchandise, and you're selling the pay-per-views, and you're selling the Monday Night Raw ratings, and you're selling the house shows. A lot of pressure on Steve Austin to be the man.
Right.
And so, yeah, even as we kind of cap this off, just kind of like the revisiting of his career, what's really important to me as we're getting into the rebooking is what Steve Austin was. Like, he was the anti-authority guy. He's the guy that so many working class folks could turn on the TV and see somebody who at least sounded like them, and maybe their head looked like him. Their body did not look like him, but their head might have looked like him. And they could say, see, he's sticking it to the man. They're living vicariously, where it's like, I want to say this to my boss. I can't do this, but I can, sure as heck watch him, spray down his boss with beer, and he can go give him a stunner and flip him the bird and all of this stuff, humiliate him the way that they wish they could do.
Right. And he just seemed like a fun guy. Like, he just seemed like this beer swilling, ass kicking, finger flipping person that you want to hang out with and have a beer with. And, God forbid you get in a fight with him, because you're on the wrong end of a butt whooping if you're standing across the ring from Steve Austin. And again, it speaks to his believability, because you could turn on the TV at the time with a Stone Cold Steve Austin match or promo or segment, and non-wrestling fans will be like, who's that guy? What's his story? And then all you need to your point, all you need to do is see him make his boss's life a living hell, and you got yourself a fan. You got yourself not just a Stone Cold Steve Austin fan, but that's how you got a lot of wrestling fans back in the 90s.
Oh, for sure. That's kind of the explosion of the Attitude Era. Where do they even get the attitude from? It's Stone Cold's attitude that this whole thing is really being called Attitude Era. It's like, yes, there's other characters that fall under that umbrella, but if you don't have Stone Cold, there is no Attitude Era. The whole him versus Vince McMahon type of thing.
Right. He definitely was the flag bearer for the Attitude Era. Yes. And it would not have been nearly the seismic shift in popularity or profits for WWE had it not been for Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, well, let's even start getting into this rebooking, because he turns heel in 2001, right after his match with The Rock, WrestleMania 17. And it's, as the proverbial fart in a church to some degree, it just doesn't work. And for me, it's like, I don't even know if there's a point in going back and trying to figure out how to make that work, because it's not, the fans didn't want it. They rejected it, and they were swimming upstream the entire time, and it never caught hold.
Yeah. And I think really the person who wanted it most was Steve. I think Steve always had more fun being a heel. He was always happy to make the money that went with being a babyface. And, I remember, I think it was one of Jim Ross's podcasts. He remembers handing Steve a check for 7 figures for a quarter of a year of merchandise. Yeah. And Steve's like, oh, I could get used to this.
Yeah. I think I could too.
Right.
I'm wearing a Stone Cold shirt right now.
I saw this.
So it's like,
the smoking skull, the classic smoking skull. But he always enjoyed working heel. And I do have a theory about this, about how Vince McMahon. I mean, I again hearing this from one of JR's podcasts. JR said, Vince said, we owe this to Steve to see if we can make excuse me, to see if we can make this work, because Steve really wanted to do it. My theory is, and I don't know how valid this is, but if you go to WrestleMania 17, it really is the apex of WWE, in my opinion, still known as WWF at the time, because they had just purchased WCW, which 4 years prior was this close to putting WWF out of business. Mm-hmm. They had just purchased ECW, which a lot of people point to and credit for the Attitude Era and the swear words and tables and violence and blood and that part of what made WWF so popular. Now, if you look back to WCW and what made WCW such a power player in wrestling, probably I'm going to pose the question to you. What turned the tide for WCW, and see if we're on the same page?
Well, let's just double check. Are you saying turning the tide towards winning, WCW winning, or turning the tide towards them failing?
Good question. Turning the tide towards WCW overtaking WWE in the ratings, and WCW being top dog in the yard for a number of years.
Well, I would for sure say the leg drop on Macho Man from Hulk Hogan, if we're going to pick a moment, is because Scott Hall and Kevin Nash coming into the company, that set something up. But that was if we're going to use comedy reference, that was the setup. The punchline was that leg drop on Macho Man.
Exactly my point. Yeah. It was when Hogan turned heel and the NWO was born, that WCW, that everybody was like, what? Hogan's a bad guy? I have to at least see this. I can't miss this. And so I do think there's something to be said for Vince McMahon's ego. And like, when he is now at the top of the wrestling heap, he owns WCW and all of its intellectual property. He owns ECW and all of its intellectual property. There's literally no one else in town right now except Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. In my head, it makes sense that Vince McMahon would agree to do this just to kind of be like, you know what? Hogan turned heel and launched WCW into another stratosphere. I'm going to take the biggest babyface since Hulk Hogan, turn him heel, and it's going to be even better. It's going to be the heel turn that nobody saw coming, that nobody could possibly believe, and it's going to make Hogan's heel turn look, I mean, not small by any means, but I think it was a little bit of anything you can do, I can do better, and now I own you, and hey, watch this.
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
Now,
no one knows that but Vince McMahon.
No one knows that but Vince McMahon. But I will say, if that is the thinking, clearly, not just was it faulty, but it's not a one-for-one translation, because when Hogan turned heel, we're talking about 1996. He had been a baby face, the All-American, the red and yellow, for well over a decade.
Yep.
Well over. He hadn't been
probably 13, 14 years at that point.
For sure. He hadn't been a heel since Thunder Lips, essentially, when he was in the AWA. So, like, we're talking about 84, 80, really 83, 80, 82, 83, 84,
right.
Where all the way up to 96. So we're talking well over a decade. I mean, Stone Cold became Stone Cold in 96.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a heel at first, but built that momentum. So by 97 is really where he's on a roll. He's steam pathing, on that steam engine towards 98, where he's the biggest, greatest thing in the world. Well, that 98, we're talking 3 years before he's turning heel here. That would be as if Hogan had come in at WrestleMania 1
mm-hmm.
and turned heel on WrestleMania 5. Like, that's
right.
That's the if you condensed all of time, and that we never got to the point that as an audience that they got with Hogan,
right?
Which was we're tired of this. People weren't tired of him.
Yeah, they weren't tired of Steve being a good guy yet. You're right. That's a great point. Yeah,
Yeah.
Hogan had been doing the same old leg drop and ripping the shirt off for better part of a decade and a half at this point. Fans were just conditioned that this is just who Hogan is. And so you're right. It was a more drastic shift because Steve became Stone Cold in 96 as a heel. Like you said, didn't become a face until toward the end of 97, 98, 99, 2000. Yeah. So you're not even getting half of what Hogan was in his run.
Yeah. And if I was talking to Steve at the time and he's like, I want to turn heel, I think it's a good idea. I'd say, we need to get 5 more years of you. We want them to get to the place that they're sick of you. Right now, they're not sick of you.
Yeah.
And yes, the bigger the baby face, the bigger the heel, right? That's kind of like the old motto with it. But only if they can accept it. Believability. That's a word that I want to emphasize again. Believability. We couldn't believe that he's turning heel. We can't believe he's shaking hands with Vince McMahon. It doesn't feel right. It feels like nope. Even as a kid, there's something happening. He's tricking Vince McMahon.
Right.
So he's not even a heel in people's minds. It's just like he's just doing this to trick him, or it's a plan or a plot.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to be in that position where, people are now creating storylines for you of how this isn't heelish.
Right. And I remember, I don't know if this was an interview with Steve or something, but I do remember hearing him say at some point, if he could take this moment back, he wishes he could have shook Vince's hand and then say, watch the stunner, as in give him a stunner right there, raise the belt up. And that brings up something that I wanted to mention, knowing that we were going to talk about this, don't do it at WrestleMania. Let WrestleMania give everybody the moment, give everybody Steve, because Steve is coming back from a year off with neck surgery. Mm-hmm. And then in his absence, The Rock becomes the hottest thing in pro wrestling. So you've got Stone Cold Steve Austin and Dwayne The Rock Johnson long before he was Dwayne Johnson. He was still just The Rock, but still just the two hottest characters in wrestling, the two most marquee names in the world in pro wrestling at that point. And I understand why they did it, because it's tune into Monday Night Raw because you need answers. But let WrestleMania just have the moment of Steve winning the belt and then do the turn on Raw. It's that WrestleMania specifically was just so great from top to bottom, between all the superstars of yesteryear in the gimmick battle royal to TLC 2 with the Hardys, the Dudleys, and Edge and Christian, to the hardcore championship match. It was just such an exquisite pay-per-view. Really, again, the pinnacle of WWF at the time. And for my money and a lot of other fans' monies, the best WrestleMania ever. To have it end like this is just oh man, this happened. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, there's no possibility really of getting that to be a good outcome for you there at WrestleMania. Like you're saying, because it's just him winning right there, holding up the belt. I'm champion
in Houston, Texas.
Houston. And I this is something I don't know Steve Austin. And he is clearly creative in some ways. Right? Clearly he knows his character. He knows how to build that character. But I've heard him say himself that he wasn't always best at coming up with the ideas. He's great at telling people their ideas sucked.
Right.
But not so much of just creating something out of thin air. And this feels like maybe he was trying to create something that he probably should have let some more people in on.
Kind of like square peg, round hole type thing.
Yeah. And let some other people say, hey, just so you know, you're in Texas. This is WrestleMania. You're coming back. You're winning. You're beating The Rock. And it's going to be very, very difficult to pull this off here and now. I know you think that all of those things mean it's going to be more impactful, but it's very possible that this is just going to be a fart in church. It's not going to go over well. People aren't going to enjoy it, and they're going to fight it.
Yeah,
You really want to do that here.
I wish I could have been a fly on the wall as people were leaving the Astrodome from WrestleMania that night, because I imagine they were so excited to come in and watch their hero Stone Cold Steve Austin win the WWF title from The Rock, which happened. But then it's just like,
no, they're walking out with their Stone Cold wallets and the chains. And like,
yeah,
they want to throw it away, but it's chained to their belt. They can't
and
get it
they
off.
paid $40 for it because they
Yeah.
bought it at a live event. Like,
Yes.
oh, it just, it feels dirty. It just feels dirty, and not in like a fun way either. Just like dirty.
Yeah, it feels like almost like a dirty trick on the crowd, because
Yeah.
they made so much money off of selling Stone Cold stuff that night too.
Oh, sure, they sure did, and probably not much on the way out.
No, there's no. I guarantee there's no returns.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not letting you return that thing. And so as we get into this rebooking, I'm keeping it. He wins. That's that. He's got that belt. If Vince McMahon walks in that ring, he's kicking him in the gut, giving him a stunner. I'm back, baby. We're ready to roll.
Yeah.
Now, where do we go from here? Because I think that we can extend it beyond, 2 years. Where I'm going to end up, just to give you kind of an arc, because really we can only fully rebook the things that did happen.
Right.
But what I want to be on the other end of it is he's going to stick around longer. He's going to have a feud with Shawn Michaels as Shawn Michaels returns. And that's kind of the book end of what we're talking about here. So, I'm Quentin Tarantino here. Like, we're jumping around in time, and we're seeing parts before we get to
That's
that part
amazing. I just lost my mind with the potential of a clean, sober Shawn Michaels coming back and being like, hey, Steve, I wasn't at my best at WrestleMania. I had a bad back. I was all pilled up. I was in bad shape. You may have beaten Shawn Michaels, but you didn't beat Shawn Michaels at 100%. Why don't you come? So where does that happen then? Because Shawn comes back in August of 2002 at SummerSlam against Triple H, I think. Steve took his ball and went home at this time. He did that. He didn't show up to work when he found out he was going to job to Brock Lesnar without any promotion or without a pay-per-view payday or any of that stuff.
Well, that would never happen, by the way. If he doesn't turn heel, he's not going to not show up, because they're not going to have a King of the Ring prelim match with Brock Lesnar, because Stone Cold might have never had the title stripped off of him, because you're not dropping it around to people and kind of getting it back, and you're not doing that kind of stuff. You're not letting him. I do at least see Steve's point where it's like, you're having me kind of job to Brock. That feels to me, and it has the scent of, you're dropping me down the card.
Yeah. Yep.
And he's not going to drop.
No. And I think you're right. Had he not gone heel, I don't think he would have he wouldn't have found his place. He wouldn't have found himself, rather, in a place where he's getting kind of dropped down the card a little bit. I think he would have had a far more prominent match at WrestleMania 18, which was against Scott Hall. And now that we're like bouncing all over the place because I got so excited about the idea of Stone Cold and a healthy Shawn Michaels. Let's backtrack to coming out of WrestleMania and work our way to WrestleMania 18, because I would love to hear who you see Steve facing off against at WrestleMania 18. And I have an idea.
Well, the easy answer, right? The easy answer would be that it'd be Hulk Hogan, right?
That's
Hollywood Hulk Hogan. That's the easy answer. But the only problem with that for me is the match between The Rock and Hulk Hogan is my second favorite match of all time.
Ooh.
I love it top to bottom.
What's number one?
Hulk Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6.
Okay.
So, and that probably informs you and any listener exactly what kind of fan I am. Is that
No, I'm not what kind of fan you are. It informs us what you enjoy most about pro wrestling.
yes,
It's
yes.
not the wrestling.
It doesn't have to be the wrestling. To
Right.
me, and this is the way I am with comedy, is that I think in comedy there's basically two types of comics. There's subgenres and you can break it all down, but I view comics kind of in two ways. Is there's the wordsmiths and there's the emotion based comics. Some people base it in just jokes and in the words, and some people base it in emotion. And I think that wrestlers and wrestling events can be broken down kind of in that way too. There's the technicals, and then there's the emotion. There's the
Yeah.
story. And so Hulk Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior broke me into professional wrestling. The emotion there, the sadness I had when Hulk Hogan lost that match
Yeah.
is ingrained in my DNA at this point. And the emotion that I feel and just the energy and the vibe I get off watching Hulk Hogan and The Rock is it hits everything that makes me tick.
Yep. It's a masterclass in manipulating a crowd.
Yes, and it's not that I don't enjoy the Macho Man Ricky Steamboat matches.
Of course.
Those are great too. But if people are like, "What's the greatest match ever?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm sure people say that one." But for me, give me Hogan just about any time because he connects directly with the crowd.
Yep.
And that's what made him particularly great. That's what makes Steve Austin great, is that direct contact with the crowd, speaking directly to them, not just through moves, but literally looking at them. And there's other wrestlers that have done this throughout history, going all the way back to the 50s, that they're seeking energy from the crowd. They will, Ricky Morton just staring at the crowd and just begging for them to help him doing something.
But you know what kept Steve strong in this, especially in the Attitude Era, is that Hogan would Hulk up and he would do the ear and he would definitely look at the crowd to support him. Yeah. Steve didn't give a fudge about the crowd. He was exactly the same wrestler when he was a heel as when he was a babyface, but he sold in a way that still kept him strong. And just the way he would hit the ropes was always aggressive. And you in the Attitude Era, you just needed somebody who was not going to be that cheesy. You needed somebody who was going to be no, they're a badass, and Steve was that badass.
Yes, for sure. And the way he connected to the crowd was different than Hogan.
Sure.
He didn't hold out his hand and seek help from them, but he did connect with you knew you're getting. He didn't do the pose. Hogan must pose. He did the beers.
Yes.
You gotta see him chug the beers. He's gonna, slam them together. He's gonna look at the crowd. He's gonna bring them into that type of moment. And he does that even with his entrance, glass breaking, the whole place going nuts. He's focused. He's looking at the crowd. Then he's getting his energy on the way to the ring.
Right. That walk.
Yes.
Nothing like it.
And so now as we get into that, so that's the tough part for me. I think if you had a really healthy Scott Hall, and I mean mentally, and I mean in sobriety,
of course,
you had a healthy version of him. I think you could have had a great match because just about nobody on the planet can take a stunner like Scott Hall.
That's true. But even then, that was a grossly intoxicated and mentally ill Scott Hall. Not like he was crazy, but he was not well.
Yes.
And also it just felt weird for Kevin Nash to be on the outside with the NWO less than a month into the company. Why not find a match for all three of them? Or why? Obviously, was Nash? I don't think he was hurt. I think he was healthy.
He just didn't have anything.
I guess they just did. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there were plans and they got scrapped. But yeah, even the Raw leading into WrestleMania was, I think, a 6-man with Hogan, Hall, and Nash against Austin, Rock, and I forgot who else. But he competed just 6 days prior. I don't think he got injured, doing house shows or anything in between. So, but yeah, I just felt it was an awkward card. And Steve in there with Scott Hall, the NWO is a big deal. Scott Hall by himself, not as big of a deal. And
Mhm.
not as big of a deal as Stone Cold was, even though Stone Cold was recovering from that failed heel turn that started a year prior.
Yes, for sure. And so here's a couple names.
Okay.
Let's just throw out a couple names because looking at the card, that gives us at least a better idea of who's even available to be on a WrestleMania 18. But I see there's a couple names that stand out to me that make it something that I go, ooh, I actually kind of like this. So I'll give you the maybe the easy go to is the headline match of the whole thing was Triple H versus Chris Jericho for the undisputed championship, which clearly, obviously, for this entire thing, the biggest mistake of WrestleMania 18 was that they did not put Rock and Hogan on last. That's the
Right.
big mistake, right?
Right. That was in the eyes of the fans the main event, and you can put the championship match last and call that the main event. Nah, that was the main event.
Yeah, there's no possible way. And so the only way that you could possibly maybe do that is if the last match is not Triple H versus Chris Jericho, but Stone Cold versus Chris Jericho.
Yep. And that means there's a ton of interest, I would think, in Triple H versus Kevin Nash. Two
Yes.
members of the Clique. Kevin Nash is coming. They're both friends. They've been friends. Kevin Nash is coming in to poison the WWF that Triple H just returned to after being out for 9 months with a quadricep injury. They can go back and dust off their history with the Clique and the curtain call and everything else. I think that would have been a far more interesting match than, Triple H and Jericho, because everybody knew Triple H was going to win that match. Everybody knew. There was not even a slightest inclination that Jericho was going to win that match.
Yes. And so that's one possibility.
Yep.
Right. That's just one.
I like it.
I have a dark horse in here, but there's kind of I guess we could call it legendary possibility here is so Undertaker takes on Ric Flair.
Mm-hmm.
I could see shifting over Ric Flair to Stone Cold, of having Stone Cold versus Ric Flair. This is the man he always wanted to be. So in some ways, mentor versus apprentice, maybe the guy that he feels you could even skew the story a little bit of this is the guy that held me down years ago.
Sure.
Didn't allow me up on the company. And now now I'm the top dog here.
Right.
And I'm going to put you out to pasture type of thing. I think
Who's the baby face?
Oh, Stone Cold.
Yeah.
I think you because Ric Flair can be sleazy and slimy. He can do things leading up to the match of trying to get in Stone Cold's head, maybe trying to work deals, maybe bringing, other people into this type of match, Four Horsemen style-esque type stuff. And so that Stone Cold isn't just overcoming Ric Flair, because obviously beating a man that's 20 years older than you it doesn't make you look heroic.
Sure.
But if you're overcoming more odds, like possibly Scott Hall and Kevin Nash being in the corner of Ric Flair, instead of facing one having the other outside, they're just both in the corner of Ric Flair, kind of like bodyguards,
right.
And possibly even having Ric Flair being associated with the NWO.
Right. That's an interesting, because he was always the one person that was never, I mean, there were a few, like him and DDP, I guess, but like DDP feigned joining the NWO and then Diamond Cutters for everybody. But Ric Flair was like the WCW poster child. He was the one that was never going to defect to the NWO. And I could see that generating, although maybe not in association with the NWO, because that might be the something of an equivalent of an Austin joining McMahon. It's like Flair would never join the NWO. Never, 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 never. But a sleazy, desperate Ric Flair would hire Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to be in his corner with a couple of baseball bats.
Very possibly. This is just This is just a little, I mean, this is not a Ric Flair episode or NWO episode, but because of how over Hulk Hogan got in this, I could almost see them flipping it where his beef is with Hogan, not with the NWO. So now Ric Flair is kind of like the Hogan position in NWO, and Hogan's on the outside as the babyface, and allowing there to be
Ooh.
some story there that you can continue NWO without just trying to rehash the same thing from
Right.
'96.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
So hey,
Yeah.
all they have to do is call me 20 years ago.
Right. Exactly. Those are some intriguing options. I never thought of Ric Flair, like with Hogan instantly becoming so over with that crowd and then becoming a face, a week or two later with the red and yellow coming back. And then Flair sliding into that spot, which, I mean, Flair later that year was a heel too. And he started managing Triple H, and that would eventually become Evolution. And I think Flair would have been into that as well.
Yeah, because I mean, let's be real. Ric Flair is a heel. He is the heel. Like, Hogan in my eyes is, I will defer to some other people in this. Like, he's my number one of both babyface and heel ever. But I will just say, okay, if you don't think he's number one, he's still top 5 all-time babyfaces, top 5 all-time heels.
Yep.
And that's very rare because I would say Ric Flair, he could be number 1 on your list of all-time heels. He is not making the top 5 babyfaces of all time. Even if he's the greatest wrestler of all time, that babyface was not his role.
Can you put Austin on that list too, you think? Top faces and top heels?
I don't think so.
Not in this context, but like his feud with like Bret Hart. And, well, I guess if you have to point out a specific feud, then probably not.
It's tough with him because really his great years are just babyface years. And so, and that's the whole point of this rebooking, is that he couldn't turn heel even and make it work. And so that Ric Flair, so that's a possibility. Chris Jericho, Ric Flair, and this is the dark horse I see on here. Just kind of a dark horse match where I'm like, I think that this guy could get something out of him and also kind of push Stone Cold beyond just the Attitude Era.
Let me guess.
Yeah, sure. You want to guess and see if we're on the same page?
I didn't want to interrupt you. I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
No, please.
Rob Van Dam?
It is Rod Van Dam.
Yeah!
Oh,
yes!
That is exactly it. Oh, we're simpatico today.
Yeah, we are.
We're sharing the same brain. This is the type of match you want to have, where you both know where you're going without actually having to call it.
Right. We'll call it in the ring, kid.
Yeah. And so that is exactly the guy, because Rob Van Dam he's close to his peak as a wrestler. Like he has spent a lot of years really building up, and he is to this point where it's like he's going to have a couple years here where he really could have been the top dog in WWF, if not for some other forces that are kind of going on. But just in terms of being over in with the crowd and actually in-ring work, great. And I think I could just picture that 5-star frog splash coming towards Stone Cold. I don't know if Stone Cold could move this quickly at this time, but if he could pop up and give him the stunner out of that end the match.
Yeah. That'd be a hell of a moment. But also, and I don't know how much WWE would acknowledge this, but they just missed each other at ECW.
Yeah, they did.
They just missed each other. And so it's like you could tie in the fact that, Steve left for greener pastures, leaving a huge heaping mess for Rob Van Dam that he had to clean up, and then became Mr. Monday Night. And then ECW started making all this noise. And like, I know you, Steve, you never forget where you came from. Like I wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen, that it would be, I don't know, not a ladder match, but maybe like a street fight or no holds barred or something, because Steve can wrestle. RVD can definitely wrestle, but I don't see this being a Matt classic. I think it's a lot of punches and kicks and, frog splashes and just basically the things that they're all good for, that they like made their repertoire.
Yes, for sure. And so now you get to pick your poison on this. Do you go with Rob Van Dam, Ric Flair, or Chris Jericho in this? And I think it also changes where it is on the card, because I really think that probably Hulk Hogan Rock should have closed everything out.
Yeah.
But if you have him Stone Cold Ric Flair, I think that's a great middle of the card. This is sort of, if you viewed it in terms of an intermission. There isn't an intermission, but if there was one, you could have this being having Stone Cold, Ric Flair, all of the stuff we talked about being the pre-intermission, and then you kind of have whatever the popcorn match is, and then kind of resetting for the second half of WrestleMania.
I think I go with Stone Cold and Ric Flair, because then you've got not one but two dream matches on that card, and it just makes it feel even more surreal. Like Rock Hogan staring at each other is surreal in and of itself. But when you also have Stone Cold Steve Austin and Ric Flair on the card, now you have four faces you can put on that poster. And you've got this is the first WrestleMania that Ric Flair was a part of since, his time with WCW. So I feel like you've got Rock and Hogan to take everybody on that emotional ride that you gravitate towards. And then you've got Stone Cold and Ric Flair, who obviously they're not like, Dean Malenko or anything, but they still are like stellar wrestlers and stellar workers. So they could put on more the wrestling match, and Rock and Hogan could put on the emotional roller coaster.
Absolutely. And something to not just gloss over is that legendary match.
Yes, boom.
That's the word.
That was the word.
Legendary. And so it's something where, man, just you talk about fantasy booking. Those people were fantasy booking that kind of stuff even at the time. And to be able to have two of those real life fantasies happening in front of them, WrestleMania 18, we just took it to another level. And so
I agree.
And that moves us on for the next year with Stone Cold, is that, I'm seeing him as we're getting to WrestleMania 19, which obviously a great match with The Rock. But I don't even know that that necessarily needs to be where we're going for 19. I think if we can get him invigorated by a Ric Flair match, invigorated with some of these possibilities of who he could be going against as Brock Lesnar comes into the company,
right?
Saying we got a big program for you with this guy. Obviously, it's going to be. Because you don't want to kill Brock Lesnar immediately. So maybe it's going to be losing to Brock Lesnar. But if you stretch it out over 6 months or, it can be something that's really intriguing, really. Stone Cold takes everything out of Brock Lesnar, and Brock Lesnar's just so raw, athletic,
unstoppable
that he does get over. And that could really be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. And also, Austin took his ball and went home. Rock comes back, wasn't supposed to come back. And then it's Rock and Brock at SummerSlam. Yes. I'm curious if Steve, if business didn't go downhill, if maybe the plan was Steve and Brock at SummerSlam, and it gives Steve a reason to chase Brock by losing at King of the Ring. I don't know if that was the case or not, but since we're fantasy booking, I could see that stretched out. SummerSlam, even Survivor Series. And then at some point, though, I do think I can't get over your idea of Steve Austin standing across the ring from Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 19 for, I guess, what may or may not be Steve's last match. I don't know what his health looks like, if he's a lot happier in his career. He's probably drinking a lot less. He's probably a lot less stressed out. So we may have gotten another year or two out of Steve Austin. Maybe even long enough for him to say sayonara at WrestleMania 20, which, I don't know. Everybody wanted to see Austin Goldberg. I don't think the match would have been that good because Goldberg is awful, but WrestleMania 20 would have been pretty dope to see Austin and Goldberg and have that be Austin's last match. But Austin and Michaels at WrestleMania 19, if if it couldn't be Austin and Rock, it should be Austin Michaels.
Okay, I now have where I want to go with this.
Okay.
So, uh, Austin Brock, WrestleMania 19, and how does Brock get over on Stone Cold? If you're trying to make it even, but you want Brock to win, it's because Shawn Michaels slides in when Stone Cold's not looking and super kicks him, and slides back out of the ring. Brock defeats Stone Cold right there, and now we've got it set up for this next year of Shawn Michaels stuff.
Ooh, amazing. And a year of like teases and promos and angles and trying to outdo each other. Like, oh
Yes.
my God. It would have been amazing.
Yes. And I could even see it being something where Brock in the match has clearly injured Stone Cold. Yet Stone Cold's still fighting. He's still, he's got all the sympathy of the crowd.
Can't put him down.
You can't put him down. He gets a stunner on Brock. And we can't believe it. And then he gets the super kick to his face. And that's enough to just level him. And then it's kind of like, where is Stone Cold? And give him like this little break of maybe a few months just to kind of like, hey, decompress. We have a lot. The company is not just on your shoulders anymore. We've got some young talent. We've got Brock Lesnar. We've got some Kurt Angle. We've got some folks in here. Shawn Michaels is back. You don't have to be burned out. And so now in that 2, 3, 4 months of talking, Shawn Michaels saying, I put this guy down. He thought he got rid of me.
Yeah.
I got rid of him.
Ooh, that's good. That's good. And then maybe it's SummerSlam where it's like Shawn Michaels and Brock. And Shawn actually looks like he's putting Brock away with 1 super kick, 2 super kicks, maybe even a third. And then you start to see that arrogant HBK come out because Austin's the face in this for sure. And Shawn is just such a good heel that Steve returns the favor at SummerSlam, maybe even as late as Survivor Series. I don't know, depending on how much time Steve would need to get himself in really good shape and just start thinking about his exit strategy. Cause it's cool. Again, 19 was a cool send-off, but man, it would have been so much more momentous if it was 20, and if it was like win, lose, or draw, this is it. This is it for Stone Cold.
Yeah, and what a beautiful. I like SummerSlam because in my mind, maybe I'm still like that 10-year-old kid. SummerSlam is the second big one, and I think that they definitely do think of it as the second one. But Survivor Series is so far down the list. I like King of the Ring better than like Survivor Series because I still think of the 5-on-5, 4-on-4
elimination
matches, elimination matches. Even though they haven't done that in 20 some years, it's still that's what it feels like to me. And so it's always been like, it just doesn't seem as cool.
Yeah.
So SummerSlam of seeing I love that idea of like Stone Cold coming in and stunning Shawn Michaels, and Brock beats him, and now we've got it all set up, and that makes it also so the championship's not on the line. Brock's the champion. You don't have to worry about it's going to be who leaves this with the championship. It's just purely who's going to be here. And so we go into WrestleMania 20, and it can be a send off. It could be something where if Stone Cold's like, I just can't do this anymore. You got a full good extra year of him.
Right.
Not going, he goes away because you want him to go away, not because he had to. And Shawn Michaels beats him and sends him away officially, or he wins and maybe you keep him on a little further. Maybe he can make it to 22, maybe, 21, 22. Maybe John Cena is now coming into the company and that's more interesting. And maybe Goldberg, you have some stuff going on there with him because maybe it's more intriguing to Goldberg of working towards a Stone Cold, because by the time Goldberg's leaving, there was no Stone Cold's not there, and that's not even going to be on the table. But, think 21, 22, Goldberg being able to like extend a little bit, not being a malcontent. And so
it's kind of a shame to think of the matches with, just pro wrestling being as magical as it is, like with dream matches and everything, like we never got Austin and Cena, and we never got Austin Goldberg or Austin Hogan. And really, Steve was like from 96 until 2003. That's a 7-year run. In 7 years, he became the biggest box office attraction that WWE has ever had, including Hulk Hogan, including The Rock, and will likely never have again, just because of how much wrestling has changed.
Yes.
That's a hot run. That's 7 years of probably the most arduous, unforgiving schedule. And there's neck surgeries and knee surgeries in there. Like, he was a candle that was definitely burning at both ends, but nobody shined brighter than the candle that was Stone Cold Steve Austin from 96 to 2003.
Absolutely. And man, what a fun time this could have been, because there's matches that were just left on the table. Like you said, Hogan, you've got Goldberg, you've got Shawn Michaels returning that they just didn't cross paths. And then even just thinking about like Kurt Angle in his prime.
Oh my God.
Angle, it's like you could have something there. And then John Cena be coming into the company, and also Edge is starting to make his ascent to the top. You're eventually going to have Randy Orton in very soon.
Oh man.
And these are people that can work around Stone Cold's limitations physically at this point.
Right. RKO versus Stunner is a program that writes itself.
That'd be great. That would be just amazing. And so, well, as we kind of wrap this up, man, it's great to reminisce on what Stone Cold was. And it's also a little painful to think about what we missed out on. Like, there was just a little bit more. And even just this heel run, knowing in hindsight that this was really one of the last things we're going to see from him.
Yeah.
We don't get much more than this, in which the best thing we get out of it is what?
Right.
And that's in which we still have to deal with today. It's disappointing. It's bittersweet, as they say. It
is. But in saying that, though, we're only kind of reminded of what we're missing out on, because what we had was just so good.
So good.
There will never be another Stone Cold Steve Austin. There will never be, anytime anybody ever holds a beer up in a wrestling ring, sorry, Sandman, everybody's going to be thinking of Stone Cold Steve Austin, even though Sandman was doing it in ECW long before. But the stage that Steve made that happen on, and the Stunner will always be Steve Austin's. What, as you said, is still a thing 20 years later. The fans refuse to give it up. God bless them. But yeah, we got so much out of 7 years of Stone Cold Steve Austin in WWF/WWE. But yeah, you can't help but wonder what could have been. And hence the joy of this podcast.
The joy of rebooking. Well, AJ, thank you again for being on the show. This was fun. This is actually one of my favorites, just because it touches on so many things. And by the way, any listeners, if anybody out there has a Stone Cold Steve Austin wallet with a chain on it that they don't want anymore and they just want to send to me, just message me. But
send it to somebody who will appreciate it, people.
Someone that will appreciate it. That won't be in a drawer. That will be hanging from my belt. And so,
yes.
And this is just a reminder also, follow at the Tough Talk Pod on Twitter, and then just subscribe. Go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and subscribe to Tough Talk with AJ Kirsch.
Thank you.
Incredible podcast. So AJ, again, thank you, and we will talk soon.
All right, man. My pleasure. It's always happy to talk rebooking with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Do you agree with our booking? Would you do it differently? Well, I'm at Comedian Luke on all social media platforms, and you can actually at Rebooking TT on Twitter and Rebooking the Territory on Facebook. You can also find out about future episodes there. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and please give us a 5-star review. It truly helps.